Alright, how's it going, y'all? Today we're actually going to be back in Lightroom, and we're going to be talking about how to use Lightroom and Synology NAS to basically allow you to access your Lightroom catalog and all the images on there from any computer in your household, all while staying in sync. And this is even going to allow us to remotely connect back and set up everything like that. So you can be on a road trip and still have access to all of your photos, edit them, and even publish them. This is going to be great because I know so many photographers who count on Lightroom and use Synology for their backend storage. It's really nice to have that network accessible storage, but the main problem with it is the fact that Lightroom will not allow you to put a catalog, that's that settings file with all your images in it, on a network share. And so if you've tried to just have your entire Lightroom catalog on an SMB share with Synology, you'll have gotten this error that says, hey, you're not allowed to do that. And this is not done because Adobe hates Synology or hates SMB shares or anything like that. It's done because it would slow down your catalog so much and actually might cause some corruption issues. So the real problem is there's a large latency whenever you're accessing something over a network share, because there's a bunch of different commands that have to happen and a bunch of communication that has to happen just to get the file, rather than just asking for the hard drive for that file. And so it really slows it down when you've got that catalog, because that catalog is constantly looking up thousands of tiny little files that would cause your computer to completely lock up trying to read that from an SMB share. And so Adobe wants it all local. And so that's what we're going to do. And the way we're going to do this is using Synology Drive. So Synology Drive is one of my favorite Synology applications, and it essentially allows you to have certain folders synced on your local computer on that hard drive. That way you can access them at local speeds, which is really important for files that you need a ton of random read and writes to that are really quick, though probably not sequential. So you need little tiny bits of a bunch of different files, and so having those local will speed up by literally 100 times in some cases, especially if you've got a local SSD. Then we'll be able to keep all of the large photo files on the external NAS and be able to connect to those over an SMB share. This way we'll have between a 1 and 20 gigabyte file on every single computer that we want, rather than the terabytes and terabytes of raw images that you will have in a regular library. Those will all be stored offline on the actual NAS, which is okay because when you're requesting an image, you're generally requesting one large file at a time, which is something that network storage can do very efficiently. This can also be used as a road trip tool. You can basically have your laptop on the road with you and be able to have all of your files there, even if you don't have internet connection, because we're going to also be setting up smart previews on the share that is synced. And so that way you still have access to all your files and can edit them remotely. Then you can export a smaller smart preview version, which are generally decently high resolution for just like, hey, can you send me that image really quickly? I need to check it out. Or even in some cases, if it's going up on Instagram or something and you're not doing a ton of dynamic range pulls or anything, I've actually found the smart previews to actually be pretty much just as good as the raw files if you're posting it to some social media thing where you really don't need that high resolution. But you'll be able to edit these smart previews anywhere, and then if you want to export the full resolution files, you'll be able to do that via a VPN connection and connecting back via SMB, which I'll explain all in this video. But basically it'll allow you to, when you're editing and looking through everything, you'll do the edits to these smart previews. Then when you're ready to do a full-on export, you'll be using the raw files that are stored on your home computer that could be thousands of miles away. Since we're going to be remote, depending on your upload capacity at your home's network, this can be pretty slow. But it's only going to happen on the export if you're using smart previews. So you only ever have to load the files from your home NAS once. Then when we're local, we can also turn it to always use the full resolution images because we'll have a direct connection to our NAS. Alright, so I know I kind of blabbed a lot there, but it's actually going to be pretty easy and pretty straightforward to set up. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to store all the full resolution files on our NAS via an SMB share. Then we're going to store the Lightroom catalog on our local disk, but that local disk is going to be two-way synced to our Synology NAS. And so Lightroom will be happy because it's got disk access to Lightroom. Then every single other computer you would like to access will be able to, one, they've got to be able to mount that SMB share, and two, they'll also have that local Lightroom file on their computer. Then anytime one of the computers updates the Lightroom catalog file, every single one of the other computers is also going to get that update when we're using Synology Drive. This is not going to allow you to have two people in the Lightroom catalog at the same time, as this will cause a conflicted state. You don't want to have this. You always want to make sure one person edits, then saves it and closes it, then the other person, once they get the update from the server, then it edits and closes it again. That way you don't have basically two different conflicts of the same file. It's not going to be the end of the world. You could basically just export those files and send them into the main catalog, but that's going to be out of the scope of this video and is going to be a really big headache. So really make sure to only ever be editing on one computer at a time. All right, and so now let's go ahead and set this up. So first off, the first thing you need to do is set up Synology Drive. It is really easy to set up, and I'll go ahead and leave a link to a tutorial that I've already made on how to set up Synology Drive in the description below. I'm not going to go over this in this video because I've already gone over it, and a lot of people probably already have Synology Drive set up. But if you've not set up Synology Drive, go ahead and follow that tutorial, and then we'll come back and we'll have already set up Synology Drive in this. So as you can see right here, I've already gone through and set up Synology Drive, and you can see I've got a few files in here. Basically, this is just my home folder, and so whatever folder you've got, as long as it's doing that two-way sync, will be good. Then if you're on a PC, you've actually got the option to basically have on-demand sync or always sync. For whatever folder you're going to be using for your Lightroom catalog, make sure that it is two-way always sync. You don't want this to sync on demand because that will be really slow whenever Lightroom needs those files. So that's the one difference on PC, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So first off, we're just going to go ahead and create a Lightroom folder in here. We'll just call it Lightroom. And so right now I'm on my main desktop and I've basically just gone ahead and created a new Lightroom folder in here. And so that way we'll have a place to put our new Lightroom catalog. And so now we'll just go ahead and open up Lightroom. And so this is only going to work in Lightroom Classic CC. It's not going to work in the new Lightroom version, but the new Lightroom version, I don't think a lot of people are using, and it's already kind of got this cloud function on it built in. And so as you can see right here, it says, hey, we can't find that catalog. Basically, I had to set up a catalog earlier to make sure this all worked out. And so what I'm going to do is just right off the bat, I'm going to create a new catalog. But what you could also do is basically just copy all of your catalog files into this Synology Drive folder that we've set up right here. And so that way you'll be able to really easily have everything loaded on there, and there's not really any different settings. I'll show you one or two things that we are going to do, and that's where you keep the raw images. But other than that, just copy all those Lightroom files into this drive and everything should sync just fine. And so now I'm just going to go ahead and create a new catalog. So I'm going to say choose a different catalog and create a new catalog. And now I'm just going to go in and put it in that drive. So that's going to be under Will Yarbrough and Synology Drive. And I'm going to put it in Lightroom. I'm going to call it for tutorial. And now I'm just going to go ahead and create that new Lightroom catalog. All right, and so now right off the bat, we can see that we're in Lightroom and we've got a brand new catalog. So I'm going to go into library and we'll see that there's no photos. But what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to set up one or two things really quickly. All right, so first let's go into Lightroom preferences. And we're going to go into performance. And this is the important thing right here. Use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. So this basically allows you to only use the smart previews, which are really small, like I think they can be 1,000th the size of the raw file for image editing. And you're going to want to tick this box if you are remote, basically outside of your home network and don't have a direct connection to your NAS. Even if you're on a VPN and have direct access to all the files, it's still going to be a lot slower. And so I would really recommend ticking this whenever you're on the road or anything like that. Then once you get back and you've got full speed to your NAS, then you can uncheck it and basically be able to edit the images directly from the raw images. And so that will give you more knowledge of exactly what the final image will look like because you'll have the full dynamic range available from your raw file. One thing I should also note, this is something you're going to really want a direct, at least gigabit connection for. Doing this over Wi-Fi, it can work, but it is going to be a little annoyingly slow in some cases. I would really recommend having this a direct connection, and if you can, go for 10 gigabit. Though 10 gigabit is really not required unless you've got really large raw files and are doing really large exports. So that is the one thing I wanted to note in there. But other than that, it's pretty much very straightforward. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and close out of that. And now we're gonna go ahead and import our first files. And so this can be done from your card, however you do it. I'm gonna go ahead and go into where I've stored all my images. So basically I've got a script that basically goes through and does a card backup. It's not too big of a deal, and I'm just going to select the folders. So basically this has all my raw files that I've stored on my NAS. And so now the important thing is, one, we're going to want to build smart previews. And two, we're going to want to go down and we're going to want to select where to put it. If you are doing the methodology that I'm recommending here, where you're basically going to put all your raw files on the SMB share, then we're going to go ahead and uncheck the hard drive, and instead we're going to put it on an SMB share that you've already mounted. I've got a tutorial for this if you don't know how to mount your Synology as an SMB share, but I would highly recommend doing that. And so I've currently got it in the photography folder, and so I'm just going to create a new subfolder within there, and I'll call it for tutorial. And so basically it's going to create a new folder for us. And so you can see we'll have for tutorial, and then I like doing year, month, date. That's just how I like to have them. But basically you're going to want to have this on the SMB share. And so that way every single computer does not have to have all these files on its hard drive. For the fastest performance, or if you're on a road trip and want to upload folders into this Lightroom catalog, what you can do for a temporary thing is actually store it directly on the hard drive. I would recommend in the same folder where you've got the Lightroom catalog. That way it's already in Drive Sync. And so then you'll be able to store them locally without having to contact your server. And so once you get back, it'll automatically sync to the server. And then what you can do is you'll be able to drag and say, hey, actually these files are now here, and basically do that process, but I'll go over that later on. So right now we're just going to be sticking this on the SMB share, and this is how everybody's going to access the full resolution files without storing them on the hard drive. So we're going to select that. We have selected build smart previews, and I'm just going to build standard previews because I don't need to. And so now we're going to go ahead and click import, and we'll give it a minute. All right, and so now Lightroom's gone through and imported the photos just as we asked it to. We can see a bunch of them here. And so now these are basically stored in two different places. So as you can see right here, this photography is the folder where the raw images are stored. And that's on my Synology NAS, that's that SMB share. And so everybody's gonna have access to these files. And so it's a really straightforward setup for that. So I can click on an image, downtown Los Angeles, and basically go through and just do any kind of develop to it. Yada, yada, yada. Mess around with it. All right, over edited, I know, but yeah. So we basically went through and were able to edit the photo, and I'm gonna go ahead and close out of this now. So now, as you can see right here, it's syncing this. And so now what I'm gonna be able to do is go to my laptop and have everything I need here. Let's also go in really quickly into this Lightroom folder, and so we can see exactly what's happening. So if we go into for tutorial, we can see that there's a few different files here. There are the smart previews, and so this is by far going to be your biggest file set here if you choose to use smart previews. What you can also do is only create smart previews for the specific images you think you would like on the road and be able to use those. But honestly, even for really large catalogs, I found that they do not take up that much room, and they can be really nice to have. And so you can really kind of choose what you would like to do. But we can also see that there's all these green check boxes, which means that they've successfully been synced with Synology Drive. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and transition to a new computer, and we'll be able to do the exact same thing. I do wanna make one other note. You do not want to have that SMB share, this photography share right here. You do not want this to be part of Synology Drive as a team folder or anything else, because it's going to try to index that. And if you're importing all of your high resolution raw files and sticking them in there, it is going to really slow down your system because your Synology is going to be trying to render previews for every single one of those images. So I would make sure that this folder is not part of Synology Drive and you do not have it indexing it. All right, and so now we're basically done with this. So we're gonna go ahead and close out of this, and we're gonna switch on over to my laptop. All right, and so now I've gone ahead and switched on over to my laptop. So now all I'm going to have to do is mount that SMB share. And we'll mount photography, which is where that SMB share is that we stuck all of the raw files. And if we look up for tutorial, we're going to see that there's a bunch of raw images stored in here. And so that means everything's working. And so now what we can do is we can go in and we can go into that Synology Drive folder. And so this Synology Drive folder is the exact same folder that is synced on my desktop, but now we're on my laptop. And so for every single computer you're adding, just make sure to reset up and re-get that exact same folder, and you'll be able to work with that with Synology Drive. So now it's also got a two-way sync, so we're going to go ahead and click on it, and we're going to open up that catalog. Alright, so unfortunately I found out that if I open Lightroom on my laptop, and I also am screen recording, well, the CPU just can't handle it and it corrupts the entire rest of the file. So unfortunately I lost that entire recording, and so I basically lost all the footage from my laptop. I'm basically just going to go through here and redo everything that I did on my desktop. I promise you it works on the laptop and it's going to be set the exact same way. It's just unfortunately, apparently my laptop cannot handle doing both at once. Yeah, it was great. As soon as Lightroom opened, and my entire file from there was corrupted on, and so Final Cut Pro kept crashing, and so it was a lovely time. But now I'm just going to continue the tutorial on my desktop because it can handle both at once. I promise you it works, and it did work. It's just the fact that unfortunately the entire recording cut out. And so we're just going to go ahead and continue on from here. Alright, and so as you can see right here, the entire thing just opened up just like we had it on the desktop, and it all works identically the same. We can see right here that the photography drive is green. That's because currently it is mounted, but we can also unmount it and see what happens there. Basically, it is identical. It is just like you went through and unplugged an external SSD and plugged it into a new computer. Everything just carried over perfectly. Alright, and so now let's simulate as if we're remote, because that's one of the really great things you can do with this. You can go on a road trip and take your laptop and not have to lug your desktop somehow. And you can still have your entire photo library. And so to simulate that, what we're going to do is we're going to eject this photography drive. That's the thing that contains all of our images. So I'm just going to select it and click eject. And so now, as we can see right here, we still have all the images, but we can see that this photography is gone. It is got the question mark. It's not actually gone. It just says, hey, I don't know where this is. And if we click on things, we are now going to see, if we go in the develop menu, that we do not have the full quality that we would have earlier, but we can still actually develop and edit things. That's the really nice thing about having those smart previews, is we're actually able to use the smart previews, which are those ultralight files, instead of having the huge files. So if you need to show something to a client and export something really quickly, you have your entire library on your laptop, and it's only taking up maybe a couple gigs. It's a really great compromise between the two. And so you can go through and just edit these just like the regular photos. The biggest thing you're going to notice is you're going to not have as much dynamic range. And so that is one thing to consider, but if you need it in a pinch, it's there. And so now let's say, okay, we're on a road trip. We obviously are going to import some photos. So let's go ahead and do that. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to click import, and I'm going to just go into my desktop. And so as we can see right here, this is a lovely Photoshop of my father and I. Over Christmas, I Photoshopped us together because, well, I could not come home. And so what we're going to do is we're actually just going to go ahead and import it. But if we look right here, we no longer have that photography volume. That's that SMB share I had. We no longer have that as an option to save the full-size raw images on. Instead, we have to select a new location. I believe actually the first time you get it, and it's actually what happened in the lost recording, you'll get a little arrow over here that says, hey, that volume you normally save stuff to is no longer available. Well, so what you're going to want to do for this road trip version is you're going to want to go ahead and put that in the exact same location that you put the rest of your Lightroom catalog. That's in that Synology Drive synced folder. That way, when you do come back, your desktop is going to sync all those new files and everything's going to carry over. It's one of the really great features where you actually are not going to have to do anything to get them back on your desktop, other than, of course, sync both your laptop and your desktop back to your Synology Drive. Then from there, I'll show in the next part of the tutorial onto how to get those back into the main volume. But we're just going to select it, and we're going to put it in that Lightroom folder. And I would highly recommend keeping the exact same folder structure, so that way we can just drag and drop later on. And so I do that by year, month, date. And so just make sure to keep whatever folder structure you have consistent. It'll really make your life easier later on down the line. And so now I'm just gonna go ahead and click import. And then as we can see here, we now have two different locations. We now have Macintosh HD, which is the internal hard drive on my computer. And that's where it's saved to now. And so now you've got the full version of this. You've got original plus smart preview. And so now you can basically do whatever you would like with that folder and basically import everything and edit everything just like you're on regular Lightroom. It's just you're saving them internally. And then if you do run into a space constraint, say the internal drive on your computer is not going to be able to handle all the photos from your trip, you can also still get an external SSD or something like that and basically just go through, and when you do go back to your desktop, you can do the exact same things we're talking here. It's just you're going to need to plug that external drive in to your desktop when you want to sync everything back together. That's the only thing you need to remember, and everything else will just work just like it is in this tutorial. Alright, and honestly, that's all you need to do. Your Lightroom catalog is going to work exactly how you expect it to for this trip. And so now we're going to go ahead and do the next part of this video where we actually are re-merging everything together once we've gotten back from that trip. Alright, back to past me. Alright, and so now we're back on my desktop, and because our laptop was able to connect back to our network, Synology Drive has now resynced everything, and we can go see there's now this 2020 folder. And if we go through, we'll see that there's that image that we put in on our road trip. Obviously, this would be thousands of images if you're on a road trip. Well, I don't know how much of a shutterbug you are, but this could be a lot more images, so it might take a little while to sync, but once it's done, we can go ahead and set this up. All right, and so now we basically want to merge this in with the same way we've got it set up for all the other images. And so we'll go ahead and first just open up our Lightroom catalog to make sure we can still see everything. And so just like that, we can see right here we've got original plus smart preview, which means it worked perfectly. We were immediately able to get the full resolution RAW files from our computer that was on the laptop that was saved all the way onto our desktop without doing anything at all because the Synology Drive sync. But now if we go in to library, we're going to see that we've got two different images, which is really annoying. And so all we're going to want to do is basically merge these two together. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop. We're going to say, hey, moving files on disk. Basically, you're about to move all your files, so we're going to be moving the files from Synology Drive, which is on that local drive, and we're going to be moving them to that SMB share. And I would recommend making sure they're in the right folder. And we're just going to go ahead and say move. And so now, just like that, we can also remove this because we no longer need it. Because as you can see, it's the empty folder. So we're just going to go ahead and remove it. And so now we only have the one volume. And we can see that we still have the original plus smart, and it is now on my SMB share, which is perfect. And that is just really how easy Synology has made this for Lightroom photographers. It is a great setup for all of this, and it works really well. I did get a metadata issue, we'll say overwrite settings, but that is pretty rare. And so yeah, we have access to all of these files just as easy as it can be. Honestly, it is really impressive how easy this is for using a Synology NAS as this total storage engine for all of Lightroom. I'd say this works incredibly well, and another thing you can do, depending on how much storage you have on all your local machines, is you can actually have your most recent files stored directly on disk, the exact way we had it when we were remote. This will give you the best performance because it's stored on your local disk. Then whenever you're done with this project, you can basically do what we just did there and just move the files off the Synology Drive onto the SMB share where you store all the rest of your folders. This way you get the best of both worlds, but remember, any files you have on that disk that is local to you will also be propagated to every single other computer that's hooked up Synology Drive to share that folder. And so if you have a laptop with very little storage or something, you might want to take that into consideration. All right, now we're all set up. We now have Synology Drive essentially syncing for us every single one of our Lightroom catalogs. Also, all of our devices are talking to the same Lightroom catalog. It is incredibly easy to use. The one thing you do need to remember is just make sure to never edit a catalog on 2 different computers at the same time, or if 2 different computers have not synced. So if you're on that road trip, make sure that somebody back home at your desktop does not edit the Lightroom catalog. You'll still be able to fix it. It'll just be a pain and you'll have to probably figure out how to export everything. But if you just remember, only ever edit on 1 computer and make sure the checkboxes occur, then you'll be good. Then we also set up that SMB share, which is going to be that bulk storage for all of our extra raw files. And that's where it can be terabytes. And they do not have to be stored on the local laptop or desktop. They're just stored on the NAS and everybody has access to them over SMB. And this is great because they're big bulk files, which is what SMB is really good at handling. And so really that's all there is to it. You can now use this and it's going to work incredibly well. I'm planning on doing a few different videos on basically setting up a Synology NAS for a photographer. And so if you've got any other needs as a photographer for Synology NAS, I'd love to hear about them. Go ahead and put those in the comments below and have a good one. Bye.